Hey everybody, Jared Sebesta here. We're going to get right to the show today titled Resetting Your Table. You know, life is just a series of transitions, and oftentimes people underestimate the effect these transitions have on their lives, especially when it comes to retirement. Well, in this podcast, Taatjes is going to use a personal story about his oldest daughter to shed light and give insight to retirees making major life transitions. Enjoy this episode. Hey everybody, and welcome back to the show. Jared Sebesta here joining you on Retire Repurpose. So glad that you're joining us here today. And like I have mentioned many times in the past several weeks, we have some new listeners joining us every single week. So for those of you who are looking for something new, a different conversation regarding retirement, you have certainly come to the right place. Most of what you will see out there when it comes to retirement, I challenge you to do this. Don't do this now if you're driving, but Google retirement sometime and see what you see. Look at some of the articles that hit your inbox when you do that. Generally speaking, the conversation will always be about retirement planning in terms of the financial. And certainly that is an important piece of the retirement conversation, but it's certainly not the only piece. It's just one of many pieces. And so there's more to your life than just the financial side. And so on this particular podcast, we are going to talk about the purpose side, the life side, the family side, the relational side, what we would almost deem the more important side of retirement. So if you're looking for a new conversation regarding retirement, again, you have certainly come to the right place. Well, we have spent a long time, and I mean like several months, talking about our mantra, time, talent, and treasure. If you are not familiar with our platform, if you have missed a lot of those shows, I certainly encourage you to go back and listen and look back at some of the shows that we've logged here in the last several weeks and even the last several months. Again, what makes up the retiree is not only your treasure, but also your time and your talent. And we spent a lot of time really dissecting these three pieces of this philosophy down, starting with time. How much time do you have left? What are you doing with your time? Really? What should you be doing with your time? How should you be spending that time and looking at the time left that you have here on planet Earth? We talked about the talent side, which is the repurpose, finding the new purpose, where you take a look back at your experiences. You take a pause and you really understand how you are made, your skills, your talents, and your abilities, and how you can apply those to the world. And then we talked about the treasure side, and we broke that down into three very important questions. What are you stewarding? How much is enough? And what should you do with the rest? And that's where we kind of left this series within a series last week. Taatjes is back from vacation. He joins me on the show here today. And again, for people to really get a deep understanding as to who we are, what Repurposed is all about, what our financial firm is all about, the last 12 or 15 shows really does a pretty good job in encapsulating all of that, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And the logo, right? The three T's baked right into that tree. And it used to be people would say, oh, it's a nice play on your last name, T, Taatjes. And no, it has nothing to do with that. Never did. It's always about, helping people see that they are, specifically retirees, have so much to offer. They've got, just decades of experience, on the workforce, and they've learned so much, but they've got the financial resources. I mean, more wealth is transitioning today than any other time in history, so they certainly have that. And then they have time. I mean, they've got more time than they've had before, both free time, disposable time, but also they don't have to go to work anymore, which for them creates a window of opportunity.
Yeah. You mentioned wisdom, and I thought that was really interesting from our last show, because we were talking about what do you do with the rest? And it's not, I don't want to say it as simple, but there's some better ways to do that. To do it than just wait till you pass and then your heirs and beneficiaries just get a chunk of money. But you talked about how you can transfer money, you could transfer wealth, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're transferring wisdom, and that's the more important piece, right?
Yeah, I think the idea is never transfer the wealth without having first transferred the wisdom, because money, as we know, can be a very powerful tool, can do a lot of harm, can do a lot of good if you have the wisdom with it.
Yeah. So again, if you missed that show last week, go back. We actually did a webinar not too long ago talking about retirement stewardship. And so even the past couple of podcasts have come from the audio of that webinar, please go back and listen to some of those shows. And again, if you really want to get a deep dive as to what we are all about, time, talent, treasure, go back and take a look at the archives over the last couple of months. But you will really see how we talk about money in a different way, and more so how it applies to your life. So go check that out. All right, Ben, we're turning a corner here today because we are going to start something new. And I think even that segue is probably pretty fitting, because we're going to talk about transitions. And we titled today's show, Resetting Your Table. And you've got a special story that you're going to share with our listeners to kind of set up that particular title. But let's just talk about this first of all. Like, you've been doing this for 20 years. I really can't think of I don't know, maybe a doctor where you're dealing with people who are, having babies for the first time, where you're talking about major life transitions, but you're dealing with a group of people that really their life is just nothing. It's all about transitions when they get to this point and are working with us. Just talk about your experience with people over the last 20 years and transitions.
Yeah, I think our business, more than any other, the financial side, is a business of transition. It's a transition-based business. So almost every major life event, there's some financial piece to it, right? So what we end up doing in this line of work, which is what I love, Jared, and I always have loved, is getting to be able to walk through major life events with people, giving them, biblical wisdom to line up with that, and trying to help them come through the transition best as possible. I mean, think about it, Jared. If you're certainly the obvious one we're talking about a lot is retirement, right? But there's so many others. It's first child is born, first child graduates. You've got a business that you've worked in for 40, 50 years, whatever, that you're going to sell. Another big transition. You had kids going off to college. You've got change of a job. I mean, all of these things are major life transitions, and all do end up coming many times to their financial person to kind of talk through it. And the best of us, we don't just provide the financial advice. We provide really transition advice.
Yeah, I was going to say that because I think it's the financial ramifications so many times that gets people in the door, where, again, they have one of what could be many transitions upon them or coming upon them. And they want to find some advice. And what ends up happening is you end up, I don't want to say like a coach or a mentor, but you end up, or even a counselor, but that's kind of how you have to operate, and that's the headspace you have to get in lots of times in these meetings, right?
Yeah, and that's the best part. I mean, when you're sitting across the table from somebody and you're able to really try to see this transition through them, and there's so many moving parts to that, Jared. That's what I've always loved, is getting to know, what are you going through? What is the person feeling? Because that's ultimately what, when people make these decisions, they're looking for assurance. They're looking for certainly wisdom. They want to know that they're doing the right thing, but they also need to know that we care. And the best way to show people that you care, I guess, is to listen and to really become invested in the transition that they're going in.
Do you think people underestimate, the levity of some of these transitions? I think it's human nature, you know what I mean? Like we resist change. So I think transitions are probably always difficult to some extent, depending on what they are. But like, do you think people underestimate just the magnitude of that season of life, from their 50s, 60s, 70s and beyond? How many, and perhaps the levity of some of those changes?
Yeah, I'd certainly think people downplay how big of a change retirement is. I mean, any change is a big deal. That one in specific, I think, is probably one of the major, if not the single biggest change people go through in their lifetime. But I think, in any transition, it starts with accepting that there is change, right? And looking at it as, yep, I've got to accept the change and realize that, yes, I am uncomfortable with it, because that's human nature. We're uncomfortable with any amount of change. We're used to, we're people that get used to a certain pattern. Patterns are disrupted. That causes us to, question, different pieces of our decision making. We question why we did this, why we did that. So it starts with just accepting. And most people don't see, it's a job change, no big deal, I'll find a new one. Well, it's bigger than that. It's a retirement. I'll just be able to golf more now, or whatever. However you look at that retirement, it's bigger than that. Hey, we had a child. Yep, okay. But you have to realize change is inevitable, and once you can accept it and realize how big it is in your life, that's when you kind of start to, I think, move into that next season.
Yeah. Well, retirement isn't the only time that you see change in your life. Obviously, there's seasons for everything, and at every point in time in life, you're probably dealing with something that's making you uncomfortable. But Ben, you've kind of had something personal. I don't want to say too personal, but it is personal for you, kind of happen in your household with your family, and so you're kind of dealing with a little bit of this as well in your household as well, right?
Yeah, that's what made me think of this, kind of going into talking about more transition stuff. Jared, is a transition in my own life. My oldest daughter is graduating, or did graduate, and this is our last summer together with her in our home, and she's heading off to college here in the fall. And, certainly the graduation season, a lot of people have been around to graduate parties, and what are you doing next, right? We look at these kids, and we were so excited for them, and I am too. I'm excited. My daughter's got plans, and, the plans that she's made, we hope and we pray that they're of the Lord, that God's kind of guiding her footsteps. But one of those next things is moving pretty far away from home. She will not be living at home. She will be at college across the nation, and she will not be at home anymore. And as I'm reflecting on that transition with my wife and I kind of sat back and looked at, this may sound funny, but I looked at our dinner table, and that's really when it first hit me, is we have a 4-person dinner table. We have a family of 4. I have my wife, myself, my youngest daughter, who's in 10th grade, just finished 10th grade, and then my senior, who's not leaving the house. And I pictured that table in our current place settings with one empty spot. And I'm looking at Lauren's spot as we're having dinner, and her place setting there with nobody there. And it's hard. It's hard to put yourself at that dinner table and see that empty place. And as I kind of thought through that and what that should look like, it kind of hit me that I shouldn't have an empty space there. We should always have a spot there for her, right? We should always, she's got a spot on our home. But that table should get rearranged. So when she leaves the house, I don't want to leave that empty spot there. I'm going to have my wife shift a little bit towards me. I'm going to shift a little bit towards Lauren's old spot. And my other daughter, Adeline, is going to move kind of a little bit too. We're all going to adjust, right? We're all going to change how we interact with each other. We're all going to change kind of the look of that table, if you will. And I think that's a great picture of what people need to do when they're facing a life transition.
Yeah.
You need to both accept it, right, like I did and am working on, but also rearrange the table, Jared. You have to rearrange it so that you do make some changes in your life. And it can be as simple as just rearranging a dinner table.
It's interesting. It's been said about life. There's nothing. The one thing that you can expect is the unexpected. The one thing that's consistent is change. And it's always hard whenever it happens, and it's it's harder when you're saying goodbye to kids or making a big life change. I think it's a really interesting parallel. You alluded to it already, but like that particular feeling that you're having. It affects everybody. It's not just an effect on you. You mentioned your wife. You mentioned your other daughter, and it probably affects everybody differently. And I think that's how transitions are. In life. When it comes to retirement, it's not just the retiree. It's not just the husband or the father retiring. It has an effect on everybody. Just like your daughter leaving for college later this year has a different effect on you compared to your wife and even your other daughter. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, I think it makes it a whole lot easier, Jared, when I stop thinking about so much about my change and start thinking about theirs.
All right.
Right. So when I put myself into my wife's shoes and say, man, that That's a big deal for her. How can I help her in this transition? My youngest daughter, man, she's losing, really her best friend. And, so when you start to think about their change, it does help your own. I mean, we see that in life, right? When you look at things and try to serve and try to be, look at your, everything through somebody else's eyes, you always end up coming across better at the end.
Sure.
But I think for a retiree today, realizing that, if mom's retiring and it's a big change for dad, that's a big deal, right? Even your children, your grown children, retirement of their parents is a big deal. I mean, it's a transition for them. Will they be spending more time together? Will they be more available for grandchildren? Is that what the grandchildren want? Is that what's best for them? Is that what's best for grandpa and grandma? So there's so much there, Jared, but I think starting with, you rearrange the table and then look at it from each person's perspective that is around the table.
Yeah, I love that. And we're talking about ways that you can really handle transition in really healthy ways. I suppose the opposite end of that spectrum, Ben, we can come back to your book and a guy named Jim, right?
Yeah, Jim was, of course, not his real name, but in my book, I talk about how, number one, he didn't realize, nor did I, how big of a life change retirement was for him, right? And he continued in much of, I guess some of the same patterns that he had been in. He didn't accept it. And then didn't realize it, like his spouse and the change that their relationship would have. He didn't realize, oh man, I do have to rearrange the table. I do have to find new things in my life to do. I do have to, make sure I'm still moving my body. I still have to, all the things that we talk about, he didn't do. And what we saw was, major health issues as a result. And it comes back to what I always, and I fully believe that people's health going down at the age of retirement has way more to do with the act of retirement than actually aging, right? Their actual age has less to do with it than them changing as much as they had. And not just the change, not changing well, right? I mean, that's really, when you walk through a transition like that and don't do it with intentionality, and don't notice what it's doing to you, that's when the problems start to creep in.
Well, I think, too, that's why we take this subject so seriously, and we spend every week on this podcast, right, trying to inspire people, motivate people, make people aware to this, to give people a little bit of context. The story, Jim, in your book, Repurpose, he was a guy who, worked many, many years in a kind of a blue-collar job, ended up retiring what you could probably say before he was ready, and certainly unaware before even you, Ben, were aware of some of these skill sets about how helping people retire through these transitions. And I think to your point and to his point, he really didn't think about it, wasn't aware of it, just kind of went into it with a shrug shoulders outlook and just said, well, now I'm just not going to work. And transitions are not handled well when we just kind of have perhaps that lackadaisical attitude towards them.
Yeah, he had no intentionality, Jared. It was just, I'm going to let life kind of come at me.
Right.
I'm not going to come at life and plan my days. I'm not going to engineer into my day the things from work, which made my life so great, right? The purpose, the guardrails we talk about, the time to get up, the time to go to bed, the different activities. He didn't really engineer this. There was no intentionality. He just let life come at him. So it was easier to sleep in a little longer. Oh, the TV was on longer. I got kind of focused on the wrong things, and life just happened to him. And that's what can happen when we're not intentional. Same thing with my story. If I'm not intentional, I'll say, okay, no, I have to somewhat grieve my daughter leaving, but I also have to say, okay, where's the excitement in this? What's the great thing that God's doing both in my life? I mean, my wife and I, in 2 years, we'll be empty nesters. I mean, we're really going to have to reset the table then. Yeah. But the same thing, we have to look now, what things can we do together? What makes this change exciting and new? What things, and be intentional about putting those things into our lives so that that the transition becomes a real positive thing, right? I think it always starts with intentionality. I
think one thing people need to hear and understand is that it's just going to be different. Like, I think you'd be foolish to just kind of walk through, with your head buried in the sand, so to speak, and be like, life is going to be the same. It's going to be the same. It's going to be the same. It's kind of like proverbially, sticking your fingers in your ear and going, la, 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 I'm just going to ignore it. And that's not a great way to handle life. and but you're kind of accepting that it is going to be different. And something else you mentioned on the show many times is where a lot of people, just from the social aspect of their job, they think they're going to walk away, and even though they're not working, in the office with the guys, they think that that's going to be the same, and it never or rarely is like that, right?
Yeah, your buddies at work, your colleagues at work don't probably want to talk about all the fun things you're doing as much, right?
Yeah.
So you may spend time with them, but the relationships change. You're not in the middle of the workplace. You're not solving the same problems they are.
Right.
You're not, dealing with the clients. You're not meeting with the vendors, whatever your job entailed. That's way different. Their job is still there. They're still doing it, which makes them a close-knit group. You're outside of that group. You've got to form new groups, the new social interaction with people, because we know that's so important. But again, you have to be intentional about engineering those things into your life because they were important. They were important. The things in our workplace that we don't give credit to, the things like, community, things like accomplishing a task, guardrails, getting things done. God created us to work. He created us to accomplish things. He did it long before we did. He created us in his image. So you have to realize all those positive things and get them engineered. So that's a massive part of this transition talk that people need to hear is work's not bad. Work gave you a lot of positive things. So when I look at this topic, I always think that's a major life transition. Except, 40 years of doing something, it's probably the biggest transition you're going to take in your life. So come at it with intentionality. Realize what was in part of your work that made your work great, right? And make sure those things are still in your day-to-day.
I think you mentioned, you mentioned acceptance quite a bit here during this show. I think that's a huge piece to that, because where there's acceptance, what I have found in my own life, and as I've just been out in the world working with people and transitioning and helping people just try to step into more of God's calling. It seems like when you can accept situations, that's where peace is. When I see people that are really, really angry or distraught, it seems like they're fighting accepting the change, and that's kind of what we're talking about. I think too, like the fact that retirees are stepping into a world that is so vastly different from when they were kids. I mean, it's vastly different from when we were kids. Do you think that has a play in the people's psyche as well with this whole transition?
Jared, I do. I think the world's getting weirder, and there's a lot of change, and there's a lot of things that even I struggle with. I think a lot of us do at our age. So right. I fast forward now, if I was in my 60s, I would see that even more, right? It's like the good old days, and they're gone, and I think that is something that does make it even more scary, I guess, to walk through that change, is looking at, man, things are awfully strange out there, right? And technology and the different things you read about, hear about. Certainly, I think another piece is our, I think the kind of the social, the backdrop of people just unhappy in general with many different things in society today. So I think you have that at the backdrop too, which makes it challenging. So yeah, I do think that plays a role. Change is hard. Change is especially hard right now for a lot of people.
I think, though, I've seen those retirees, and we work with them. The ones that are really engaging with life are the ones that have just accepted it is different. And this is a silly example, but I can just think of Zoom calls. We didn't even hardly know what Zoom calls were like pre-COVID, but it seems like the retirees that are engaging that, using that technology to connect with their kids, their grandkids. This is just, again, a very general statement, but those are the ones that seem to be flourishing and are happier and more engaged, more fulfilled than perhaps the ones that want to just hang on to the past and not accept that. And to your point, it's really about like seeing the good in that. And there's a lot of good out there, even in the midst of a lot of the bad.
Well, there's a lot of good, Jared. And we praise retirees all the time for all that they have to offer, right? I want them to hear, like, coming in this transition, God has more for you. You're here for a reason. And that's if you've lost a spouse, if you've had no matter what, if God has you on this planet, He has a plan for you. So looking specifically for God's hand to guide you in this next season, that will bring you so much joy and fulfillment, walking into His pathway for you.
Securities offered through Avantax Investment Services. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Avantax Advisory Services. Insurance services offered through an Avantax affiliated insurance agency.